Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kim Brown in Baltimore. The resistance against the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota was met again over the weekend with a big law enforcement presence. Police arrested over 100 protesters on Saturday. Most, according to police, were trespassing on private property. On Sunday, protesters were able to shut down a major highway in the area, Highway 1806, which is a big thoroughfare in that part of the state, using a blockade to prevent the continued working on the $3.8 billion pipeline, which will run near the reservation of the Standing Rock Sioux Native American tribe. And joining us now to talk about the actions that occurred over the weekend is Jihan Hafiz. She is an independent journalist who has been covering the No Dapple events on the ground, and she was actually one of the people who was arrested over the weekend. Jihan, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me, Kim.
So give us some details about what you saw and what you experienced on Saturday and Sunday. What was the cause of your arrest?
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning, because when the police talk about what happened, they're talking about when they approached the protesters. Prior to that, I'd say about 2 hours, there are about 200, 300 people up at dawn, just as the sun was rising, and they had a water ceremony and a prayer, and they prayed before walking. And as they walked, they were also praying and singing and being blessed with sage and other traditional ways of Native people. They marched for about 30 minutes until they reached the site of where the pipeline's happening, and that's where we saw about 70 to 100 police officers. They were actually running toward the direction that we were in. So before the protesters ended up down there, there was already sort of this tension from the police, just the sign of them running and the batons and the guns they had in their hands. When the demonstrators got down to the site where the construction's happening, there was a bit of a back and forth there, as in the protesters were chanting "Water is life" and very peaceful praying, and no confrontations at all between the demonstrators and the police. They proceeded to walk in the direction where there was a construction site where a number of demonstrators had locked themselves to the machinery that is obviously building the pipeline. And the protesters who were in prayer were actually heading in that direction to stand in solidarity and to also bless the people who were partaking in the chaining to the machinery. I would say maybe as we approached the top of a hill, we were surrounded by 100, 150 police officers. It would seem there were 4 different divisions of the police. So there was the South Dakota Patrol, South Dakota Police, North Dakota Police, police wearing black, so I'm not sure where they came from because they had no sign of where they appeared, and also the military was present. And there were private armed personal carriers. There was a huge police truck that also appeared, as well as a couple of vans, white vans that appeared. And out of nowhere, without provocation, one officer, he's the one that you see in the video there, he had this massive can of pepper spray, and he approached the front where the banner was, where actually all the praying was happening, and he sprayed people in their faces, which you can also see in the video. So the initial confrontation, or the initial contact with the demonstrators, came from the police, and there's lots of video accounts that show that. I was a witness there as a journalist, so I saw that this was happening immediately, and the police were pulling a number of the Native, because it's a Native-led march, obviously. They were targeting a number of the Natives who were partaking in it, who were leading the march, and that was very obvious as well. And then there was sort of this, out of nowhere, they sort of approached people, and they just started pushing very violently and beating a number of people. They body slammed one man, I saw that. They were threatening people with different guns. There were rifles there, machine guns, non-lethal guns. They were threatening to shoot off tear gas. So right from the bat, there were a number of different threats to the people. So the people were like, okay, we'll retreat, we'll go back to where we were. And out of nowhere, they announced over the loudspeaker, which you can hear in the video, stop, everyone is under arrest. And in this crowd, there's women, there's children, there's babies. I mean, as I mentioned, before everyone took off, they were praying. So this wasn't a protest of loud chanting and angry chanting. This was a protest of prayer. They're praying, heading toward that direction. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of fear, and people were scared of what. I mean, they didn't retreat, but there was a lot of concern that they were going to start beating people profusely, and also confiscating cameras and cell phones, which were reporting live at the time on Facebook. So people retreated, and the police continued to come at people very forcefully. And as they were approaching us, they were just running into crowds, because everyone was locked arms. They ran into a crowd and would just beat someone with their baton and then pull them out and arrest them. And as I mentioned, they were targeting. I saw them target 2 Native women who were leading the march. They pointed in their direction and said, "Grab them," and they did. They nabbed them, and I filmed that, and that's what you see. This young woman who was leading the march, she's being taken away by the police officers. They then backed us up against a barbed wire fence. So imagine the chaos that created. Everyone is stuck on barbed wire, and they're pulling up the barbed wire trying to get through. Again, there's men, women, children in this crowd. So after everyone helps each other get through the barbed wire, and there are injured people at this time, pepper spray, beatings, there's someone who sprayed their ankle, they're now barbed wire, scar wounds from this. And as we're heading back toward the campsite, right before we leave the construction area, we notice the police are corralling us. So you have the military truck and the police truck behind us, along with 70 or 80 police officers. And in front of us, there are a couple other police trucks, along with about 100 officers. This you can see in the video. They begin to corral us like cattle. So they're there's nowhere to go at this point. Everyone's trapped inside this circle. And then they let off.
Jihan, but before we go any further, I mean, the chairman of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, David Archambault, he told NBC News on Sunday that, quote, that the Department of Justice should be enlisted and expected to investigate the overwhelming reports and the video demonstrating clear and strong-arm tactics, abuse, and unlawful arrests by law enforcement in the area. Do you think that there needs to be some sort of federal intervention because of how heavy-handed law enforcement seems to be dealing with peaceful protesters and journalists?
Absolutely. The approach that the police took was unwarranted. It's completely unwarranted, because no one was even swearing. There were no curse words, or there was no reason for that kind of force, especially when you have women and babies present, elders praying. These are people in their prayer. So if the police wouldn't attack a church group, this is essentially they're in prayer as well, heading in this direction. Aside from the force that they used, the treatment of people in jail is also a subject that should be investigated. They crammed us in, and fine, it's understandable they were not prepared, and their cells are very small. They couldn't fit the amount of people they arrested. And so they had us sprawled out on the floor. We were sprawled on the floor. They didn't have blankets. They were very basic things you're supposed to give prisoners when they're processed through jail or they're being held to find out their citations. There was no food, no water, refused phone calls. When they opened the door and we could see through to the men's was something that you would never imagine you see in America. You had the prisoners who were in there prior to us arriving. They were locked. They were on lockdown, solitary confinement, while they housed the men, and they were all on the floor. In some cases, there was nowhere for them to sit. They were all piled up on the floor, and they refused phone calls. They didn't feed people till hours later. No water, and so the way that people were also treated in jail, all the women and all the men were strip searched, and a number of the women who were in the holding block with me, the way they were strip searched is very humiliating. I'm talking about like asking the women to lift their breasts, to pull apart their cheeks, to do jumping jacks, and go up and down and cough. These are things that there's no one that is criminal there. There's video evidence that there was no one there being violent. So the fact that they use this kind of behavior toward peaceful protesters and journalists is really troubling. I wasn't the only journalist that was taken. There were a number of other reporters who were also, and journalists who were documenting this, who were tackled to the ground, women tackled to the ground, their cameras taken, their things confiscated. The conversation of us being journalists and doing this for work completely ignored. And so, what's been happening here is not just the police contact, but also they're allowing the police to conduct a media blackouts. So while we're filming, there's a number of different media at the camp, from the camp, that have drones that are surveying the area to see where the police are or what they're doing. They shot those down with machine guns just yesterday. And so there definitely is this attempt to shut out any kind of imagery, any kind of narrative that's coming out from the camp and from the peaceful people who are camped out there and who are protesting the construction of Dakota Pipeline.
So, Jihan, were you able to get your property back, and what were you charged with, and what were some of the other protesters charged with?
Yes, I have not received my camera. In particular, my camera was confiscated by the police. When I asked the captain in charge of my camera why my camera was taken, he said that it's evidence in a crime. And I assume that what he's talking about are the citations that we are giving for what we are charged with. I was charged with engaging in a riot and criminal trespassing. So those are the charges against me, and then they didn't give me back my camera, and they're holding it as evidence. As an independent journalist, my camera is my livelihood. This is how I work. I'm a video journalist as well, so I capture everything on my camera, and it's an essential tool for me to have here as I'm reporting. Aside from that, the confiscation of our equipment is also part of this media blackout. They're trying to prevent, also intimidate and scare journalists from coming to cover this. Because once you have your equipment taken and you have to wait for it, you have to come back, and there's a number of different issues that you have when you take their equipment. I believe in a number of different reporters and journalists here who have been filming that they're doing this to prevent other journalists from coming here and covering the camps.
So, Jihan, let's get an update actually on the pipeline itself, because even though the Obama administration has asked the Dakota Transfer Partners, which is the company actually building the Dakota Access Pipeline, to voluntarily halt construction on areas in legal contention near the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, prior accounts have told us that told the Real News that the building is ongoing, and that are you able to confirm that the construction of the pipeline is still happening?
That's absolutely still happening. That's completely still happening. And if it wasn't, then we wouldn't. When people go to do these actions, you wouldn't see the progress made by their construction. It's clear that they're still constructing, that they're still working on the pipeline despite the halts. And this is happening every day, which is why a number of people here believe that these attacks have been ramped up, that the assaults on the journalists and the mass arrests of peaceful protesters, this has to do with the fact that they're trying to rush this through to prevent anything from stopping it from happening. And, everything in this area is on the side of the North Dakota Pipeline. And I'm talking about the authorities, the media. Everyone that's in charge here seems to somewhat be in cohesion with the officials of the Dakota Pipeline, because there are a number of reports that different officials from the pipeline were actually serving the jail. And I did see people in black who didn't have there were no signs of where they came from, if they came from correction facilities or other police departments, just in black, surveying the area, surveying the jails when I was doing fingerprinting and stuff like that. And there are other rumors that they're giving information to the media, and if you look at the media reports, they go hand in hand with what the police is reporting, what the police has been releasing about how the demonstrators have been conducting their peaceful protests, such as saying that protesters, grabbed the pepper spray canister from a police officer and sprayed him in the face. Now, logically, the person that did that probably would have been assaulted very badly on the spot, but instead, the video shows you that this officer that they claim was the one engaged in this, he is physically attacking people with his pepper spray. And the peaceful protesters are behind a banner. No one ever reaches forward for a police officer. So there's really a blackout, and the general population, I think, in North Dakota, they're unaware of what is happening at these campsites and how the police are treating people and how they brutalize people when they approach them. Just yesterday, they ambushed people. They came from around the hill and ambushed two Native boys who were on the hills, scouting the area. They came on their four-wheelers and kidnapped them, essentially, missing, arrested. And so that's what's happening, shooting drones out of skies, there's a lot of belief that, there's a lot of thoughts that they've ramped up the construction in order to offset any kind of further opposition to it.
Indeed. We've been speaking with Jihan Hafiz. She is an independent journalist. She has been covering the events on the ground in North Dakota surrounding the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Jihan, we certainly appreciate you taking some time to speak with us today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.